Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Do you want me to, we let the other participants in?
Yep, everyone's here.
Everyone's here. Great.
Yep.
Okay, well, it falls on me to welcome you all to the Undergraduate Research Showcase. This is one of the highlights of our program every quarter. It's really a time for celebration and appreciation. So we're celebrating all the hard work the students have done this quarter, and looking forward very much to hearing your presentations. And we're also expressing our ongoing appreciation to internship hosts for making the experiential part of the UCCS experience available to all of you and us. So thank you to our hosts. Thank you to you, our students, for putting in the effort that you have, and look forward very much to hearing your presentations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Kravitz. So again, welcome to the UC Center Sacramento's Undergraduate Research Showcase. We're so proud of our amazing work our students have accomplished this term. The format today will be that each student will present. After the student presents, we will take one question from the internship host site. If there isn't a question from the internship host site, then we will turn the question over to our academic team. We will have an open Q&A at the end of the session as time permits. And with that, our first student presenting today is Valerie Adams, who interned with the Advancement Project.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Adams, and I'm a student at UC San Diego. California has a recidivism rate of about 50%, meaning that about 50% of inmates released from a California correctional facility will go back to prison within a 3-year period. The research question I examined is how access to mental health treatment in California prisons affects recidivism. I hypothesized that increased access to mental health treatment will decrease recidivism rates. I'm doing a comparative study looking at mental health treatment access levels as well as recidivism for 8 different counties in California. These 8 counties make up about 70% of released inmates. The data that I used comes from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I first collected data about the capacity of the mental health programs available at 15 different CDCR facilities, all located in the original 8 counties. In order to measure access levels of mental health treatment, I compared program capacity by facility with overall facility population. I then compared this data with recidivism data to determine whether increased access has an effect on recidivism. Finally, I conducted correlational analysis on the data and found that there is low correlation. My hypothesis was not supported by my findings. Although Kern County facilities have the second highest access level to treatment, they also have the highest rate of recidivism. On the other hand, San Diego has the lowest access level to treatment, but also has the lowest rate of recidivism. The programs offered in these prisons are extremely small. The highest access level was 5.8% in Riverside County, meaning that only 5.8% of Riverside County inmates are able to participate in treatment. We need to expand these programs and ensure they're offered to all inmates who struggle with mental health. Additionally, there needs to be further research on different types of mental health programs and which are most beneficial to inmates. There are a limited number of programs, and with an expansion of existing programs, it is possible that we could see a significant effect in the future. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Valerie, for such a great presentation today. And so with that, I'll turn over to a question from the internship host site. Yes, Advancement Project.
Good morning, and good morning, Valerie. Great job. It's excellent to finally see your work come to fruition. Yeah, I had a quick question about from the existing programs that you saw. Can you talk a little bit about like what you saw as like pretty common programs, and then maybe if there was anything that stood out to you about like what programming was available?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are only 2 existing programs that are consistent at all CDCR facilities, which are substance abuse treatment and anger management. There's also some cognitive behavioral therapy programs available at certain facilities, but not at all of them. This is why I think it's really important that we need to expand these programs and make sure that people are able to access the treatment that they need when they are in prison to ultimately just help them better their lives and not go back to prison once they're released.
Great, thank you so much, Advancement Project, for the question, and thank you, Valerie, for the response. And so our next student presentation today will be from Alfonso Gomez, who interned with the UC Student Association.
Hello, let me just share my screen. Can everyone see this?
Yes, looks great, Alfonso.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alfonso Gomez, and I'm a senior here at UC Davis. I am interning with the UC Student Association. In California, students of color are disproportionately being turned away from University of California colleges because they aren't even eligible for admission. The reason for this is because they are not completing A through G courses in their high schools. My research topic examines the effect of college preparatory courses, or lack thereof, available in California high schools on admission rates for students of color. Therefore, I hypothesize if more high schools offer A through G courses, more students of color will have access to and complete A through G courses, making them more likely to be admitted into a UC. After researching data collection from the California Department of Education and the UC admissions database, I measured the number of A through G courses in 6 California counties from 2014 to 2019 school years, and looked at the number of admissions for incoming freshmen in those same counties and same years. My findings show that there is indeed a relationship between the number of courses meeting UC requirements in schools and UC admissions for students of color. One implication shows that although A through G courses were offered in counties like Colusa and Sierra County, little to no students of color were actually admitted to UCs. In order to address these disparities, California needs to update its graduation requirements to align itself with A through G UC course requirements, and more funding is needed to address educational resources and other social services that affect students of color. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Alfonso. And it looks like okay, there we go. I was like, we had lost your video there during the talk, but okay, great.
Could you please reshare your screen now? Sorry.
Yeah.
Is it back on?
The screen, yeah, the poster's still missing, and we don't see you either.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Try one more time.
All right, Alfonso. Yeah, we still don't see it. So why don't you go ahead and turn it off and share your poster so we at least, yeah, there we go. Let's do that then. All right. And if there is a question from the internship host site. And if not, then over to our academic team. All right, Sharif.
Hi, Alfonso. Great poster, very interesting project. I was wondering, how does A to G course completion facilitate college admissions, such that what is it about A through G courses that you would expect to increase college admissions?
With UC applicants, in order to even be eligible, they need to complete a certain amount of A through G courses in core subjects that are taught in high schools. So because there's an array of courses and subjects that can and cannot be, I mostly just focused on core subjects like English, mathematics, foreign language, history, and science. Those just 5 core subjects. And so the California Department of Education database tells you how many courses are offered that are A through G, but also which ones actually meet UC requirements. And so I was able to find and differentiate those courses through the California Department of Education.
Great, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Alfonso, for the great presentation. And thank you, Sharif, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Hannah Dolan, who interned with the UC Student Association.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you and
Okay.
see your poster. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hannah Dolan, and I am a fourth year at the UC Davis. So sexual violence and sexual harassment is a consistent, prevalent issue in California that is underreported and understudied. My research focuses on sexual violence and harassment at UCs, specifically what policies led to higher rates of reporting. I hypothesized that UCs with better sexual violence and harassment policies will have higher rates of reporting. To determine whether UC policies and the rates of reporting have improved, I analyzed the UCs in the 2015 to 2016 and the 2019 to 2020 school years. First, I calculated the total number of sexual misconduct reports the campus received in those years, how many of those cases were investigated, and the number of sanctions against perpetrators. Then I factored in the population of the UC to find the rate of reporting. To measure the policies, I created a policy index that showed whether the UC complied with federal and state policies and published annual reports. I found that Los Angeles and Santa Cruz had the highest rates of reporting despite not having the highest scores. Merced and San Diego submitted no reports in 2019 and had the lowest scores, and Irvine had the lowest rate out of all the schools that did submit reports. It appears that the rates of reporting at all UCs increased with the implementation of annual sexual violence and harassment training. There were no noticeable differences in the UC policy index that explains why Los Angeles and Santa Cruz had the highest rates of reporting. The rate of investigations and sanctions did not increase with the rate of reporting, but instead were stagnant or declined at most UCs. The lower rates of investigations correlate with the changes to Title IX by the Trump administration, which made investigations more difficult for survivors to pursue. From what I observed, investigations are more likely to result in sanctions against the perpetrator. Based on my research, having annual sexual violence and harassment training is the best approach to increase the rate of reporting. I believe future policies should establish sexual violence and harassment training in high schools and community colleges, as those schools serve more students that are disproportionately affected by sexual violence and harassment. UC should be required to submit annual reports so the public is aware of the issue and further research can be done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for a great presentation today. And if there was a question from the UC Student Association? And if not, over to our academic team. Yep, Professor Quila.
Hi, Hannah. Really nice presentation. I know you look kind of more in depth as well at some of these sanctions and stuff like that. I was just wondering if you saw kind of any differences across schools in terms of kind of the strength or the type of sanctions that were doled out.
Yes, so most of the sanctions that I looked at, or what I counted for sanctions, were whether a student was expelled or if their academic record was put on hold, or if it was a faculty member that was the perpetrator, then if they were dismissed from the school. And overall, for obviously faculty members, most of the time they were either terminated or they resigned prior to the school terminating them. And then for students, most of them, it was a suspension either for a few months or a few weeks. And that was what I saw across for most universities.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah, for a great presentation. Thank you for the question, Professor Quila. So our next student that will be presenting today is Star Flores, who interned with the UC Student Association.
Hi, my name is Hairston Flores. So approximately 22% of undergraduate students in the US are students, and 1.3% of financial aid applicants in California are parents. This is an encouraging figure showing the amount of parents enrolling in higher education is steadily growing. Unfortunately, only 17% of student parents attend public four-year universities, and only a third of undergraduate student parents complete a degree. As a student parent myself, I began to wonder how support or lack thereof from universities affects student parent outcomes. So my research question was, how do programs dedicated to student parents and or resources affect student outcomes across the UC system? So my first figure was just the percentage of parenting students at each UC. I thought that was like good background, and I kind of went into it later on. And then my hypothesis was that the more resources a UC campus offers student parents, the higher graduation rate they will have. So the theory there is that many, if not most, obstacles that force student parents to discontinue education could be overcome if they were given the right amount of resources from their school. So I collected quantitative data from 9 different UC campuses. I only did the undergraduate ones because this is specifically undergraduate students. And I made an index 1 to 9 based on how many high demand resources they had available. And the 9 resources I chose were what I was able to collect as qualitative data on what were most needed according to student parents. So the independent variable being the index and the dependent variable being the graduation rates of each UC. So my findings, first, the resources student parents needed the most were childcare, access to diapers and wipes, lactation support, financial aid specific to students with dependents, health insurance for dependents, priority registration, family housing, food resources, and just a website that had information. And then I didn't find a strong relationship between percentage of student parents and the amount of resources available, which I thought was interesting because you would think like the more they have, the more students they have, the more resources they would have, but that wasn't really a thing. I did end up finding correlation between having a high score on the index and having higher graduation rates or higher or lower. So that supported my hypothesis. So figure 2 is just showing the score on the index from lowest to highest. And then figure 3 is just showing the graduation rates from lowest to highest. So the implication here is that student parent resources are useful and they help student parents graduate. And then based on the findings, I'd recommend more uniformity in the UC system because there's a lot of variance. And I would work towards providing subsidized childcare at all campuses because that was really needed by student parents.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for a great presentation today, Star. And so if there was a question from the internship host site. All right, and if not, over to our academic team.
I'd have a question. I just wondering, what is the range of incidents at different campuses? I mean, how many what is sort of the low and high number of parent students among the campuses? I mean, how large a problem is this?
Yeah, so UC Santa Barbara has the lowest amount, and 0.5% of their undergraduates are student parents. But then you have UC Riverside as the highest, and they are at 1.7%. So it varies for sure, but every campus has enough where there should at least be like a website or some sort of information out there.
And where within the campus administration is this housed normally?
In the Basic Needs Center usually.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Usually Basic Needs Center has, or Women Center is in charge of student parent stuff. I know Davis at least has like specific for student parents, like staff and things like that, but I'd say at least half of the UCs kind of just put it within basic needs or women health.
Okay, great, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Star, for a great presentation. And thank you, Professor Tamar, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Carla Vallejo Hernandez, who interned with the UC Davis Applied Policy Center in the summer of 2021.
I'm having a little trouble presenting my slide. I'm not sure why. Okay.
Yep, there we go. Play from start. Yep, perfect.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Vallejo, and I intern at the UC Davis Center for Applied Policy and Education. My research question is, does increasing the budget of the California Department of Corrections lead to lower recidivism rate? I was inspired to research this based on a study published in 2018 by GoFunding Rates, which found that on average, the state of California allocates around $65,000 per inmate per fiscal year, compared to $11,500 per student. The purpose of my study is to evaluate whether increasing the budget will lead to lower recidivism rates. So in 1994, California enacted the 3-strike law that established strict sentencing requirements for felony offenders, and it marked a tough on crime period here in the state. And in 2011, we saw a shift to the public safety realignment, which saw more rehabilitative punishment and sentencing. Recidivism rates are measured as the likelihood that a convicted criminal is reconvicted of a new crime within a 3-year period after being released. And this is important because it's how the state determines whether rehabilitation programs are succeeding. I hypothesize that as the budget of the Department of Corrections increases, the recidivism rate in the state of California drops. I conducted this research by looking at the state budgets for the years 1994 to 2021, paying close attention to changes between 1994 and 2011, which marked the change in attitudes. I then compared this recidivism to the recidivism rate from each year. I found that data on recidivism rates is very difficult to find and very limited. And even when you do find it, it is very hard to interpret. I also found that the budget of the Department of Corrections has nearly doubled since 2011, and it has quadrupled since 1994. Yet the rates of recidivism since 2003, which was the most recent year that I was able to find data for, have remained relatively stable at around 50%, even as of 2021. In conclusion, I find that the Department of Corrections needs to increase transparency so the public can understand how tax dollars are being spent and whether the programs being paid for are helping rehabilitate inmates. And from an audit on the way that they are spending the money and what kind of programs it's going into, the programs that are unsuccessful, we could reallocate those funds to more preventative crime efforts, such as increasing funding in education and homelessness. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Carla, for a great presentation today. And so if there's a question from the host site, and if not, over to our academic team.
I would have a question. Did you have a chance to look at, did you have a chance to look at this issue of recidivism by not just looking at what happens inside the prison while people are incarcerated, but what happens after they're released? I mean, it seems to me that many of the things that I've seen, it's what happens after the person gets out that really is maybe more responsible for recidivism than whatever programs are available while the person is in. Have you looked at that at all and thought about sort of a more systemic view of this problem?
Yeah, so the programs that the state of California is implementing now is to help inmates obtain the resource, like the skills necessary to succeed outside of prison, because what we find is oftentimes that prisoners get re-released and they feel like they need to continue to commit crimes so that they'll be back in prison because they don't know how to survive outside of it. And so they have been implementing things such as halfway homes, or there's a men's rehabilitation program specifically here in the state that splits inmate sentences between half jail time and half a halfway home. But I did not look at how that impacts their likelihood to, like, what the outside world, how it affects their likelihood to re-offend.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Carla, for a great presentation, and thank you, Professor Tamar, for that question. And so our next student that will be presenting is Luca Moretti, who interned with the California Department of Education Legislative Affairs Office.
So I'm just setting up. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Hello, my name is Luca Moretti, and students with disabilities have a graduation rate of 77% in California. This is the lowest rate for any marginalized group of students within California, and students with disabilities face significant challenges in seeking employment and pursuing higher education, which leads me to my hypothesis. Do school districts with lower levels of socioeconomically disadvantaged students have overall better outcomes for students with disabilities, which I view as true would occur because more wealth in the community would lead to better access to healthcare, so diagnosis rates would occur at earlier ages and better intervention can occur earlier. To see if this is true or not, I created a small N study using a sample of 30 districts using data from the 2019 to 2020 school year with distributions of 5 urban and 10 suburban and rural districts alongside 5 charters. I found the overall percentage of socioeconomically disadvantaged students in each district, and I compared that to 4 dependent variables: graduation rates, pursuit of higher education, competitive higher education employment, and any higher education or employment. I then correlated this data to see if any correlation exists. And I found that correlation exists, but not in the way I thought. It actually turns out for the first variable of higher education, an R value of 0.22 occurs, which means the more socioeconomically disadvantaged the district is for the variable higher education, the more effective outcomes will occur for students with disabilities. And basically and there was no positive or negative relationship that was statistically significant for the other 3 variables, meaning that number 1, my data wasn't fully expansive, but number 2, my hypothesis wasn't really proven true or false. But what it means is that a lot of the outcomes are dependent on variables we can't quantify, such as teacher passion, support of students with disabilities, and other programs done within the district that can't just be told in a specific percentage. So I'd advocate for more funding for students with special education and more funding for teachers specifically in special ed.
Great, thank you so much, Luca, for a great presentation today. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over for questions. So if the internship post site had a question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. All right, Amy Paterno.
Yes, thank you. Great job, Luca. I do have a question. Why are some local educational agencies that are economically advantaged have weak outcomes for students with disabilities?
So I would answer that in a 3-fold way. Number 1, my data sample of 30 districts, has sampling errors likely, which shows that there could be some outliers, such as San Ramon, which has 0.6% of students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, but a outcome of 0.89, and a few other districts are similar in that outlier. And I would say that, districts that are well off that aren't meeting the needs are doing 3 things wrong. Number 1, they're promoting UCs as the end all be all. And so a lot of students with disabilities who might not get services, might not get intervention, might be academically behind, but are able to be successful in a community college or a CSU, but aren't being shown that that's a viable route. So a lot of them might not pursue higher education. There's also overall, it's hard because when looking at all of these data variables, it's such a small sample size, as I previously said. But beyond just that, when we're looking at districts, what they prioritize and what they focus on is very different and unique from district to district. And so I think a lot of these districts that are very well off are spending more time specifically focused on students who are going to be academically successful and elevating them versus trying to ensure that every single student in that district is academically successful.
All right, thank you so much, Luca, for your presentation. And thank you, Amy, for that question. Appreciate it. And our next student that will be presenting today is Pauline Torres, who interned with the California Department of Education Equity Office.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Paulina, and my research is on Latinx student retention at the University of California system, among UCs that are Hispanic serving institutions, meaning that 25% of the students are Latinx, and UCs that are emerging at Hispanic serving institutions, meaning that 25% or less are Latinx students at their institution. In 2020, Latinx students were the largest group to be admitted into the UC system with 36%, making the UC system a Hispanic serving system. Yet the retention for Latinx students decreased by 2% in the last 2 years. My research explains how support services impact Latinx students' graduation rates at UCs that are HSIs and UCs that are emerging as HSIs. I hypothesize that UCs that are Hispanic serving institutions have higher graduation rates and a higher presence of programs and resources for Latinx students when compared to emerging Hispanic serving institutions. To address my question, I did a program evaluation, which is essentially an umbrella for a term of 11 categories. All of these categories were measured on a scale from 0 to 1. And I also collected the graduation rates for 2017, which are the most current. My findings demonstrate that the top 3 campuses on my evaluation that have the highest Latinx graduation rates and also the highest presence of resources are actually emerging Hispanic serving institutions. Furthermore, which I also found interesting, that 50% of the resources at these institutions are in some way, shape, or form student-initiated or student-led. Based on my analysis, receiving HSI status does not guarantee higher Latinx graduation rates or a higher presence of resources, therefore not supporting my hypothesis. However, this does show that retention models are much more difficult to implement if your student enrollment increases. As this area of research continues to develop, I recommend that institutions support student-initiated and student-led projects and resources with more funding and aid. Also, cross-collaboration is essential when trying to perfect this HSI model at the different campuses. Finally, more Latinx students means more Latinx faculty. Students must see themselves in these spaces to feel supported and ultimately retained. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina, for that fantastic presentation today. And so if there is a question from the internship hub site, Diana Gutierrez.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Pauline, for that great presentation and congratulations on completing a very important research project. I was curious to know, for a school that's interested in becoming an HSI, and based on your research analysis, what would be your recommendations for such a school in creating a successful program to increase graduation rates for Latinx students?
Thank you for that question. My initial understanding of this process would be, I think, asking the students and the student organizations in those spaces. I think often why student-initiated and student-led work is so important is because it's grounded in student perspective and the student experience. So I think often what these institutions are missing are they go right away to the numbers, not so much the experiences of the current students. I think shaping it in the way, the needs of the students and providing those programs and essentials for them. That could mean a task force, that could mean having like an HSI task force or HSI collective of students, specifically like student leaders at those institutions. And from there, taking recommendations and criticism as well, because the HSI model is not perfect. And often we see that most institutions are Hispanic enrolling where they're meeting the 25%, but they're not Hispanic serving. So it's two different categories. So I would say ultimately trying to create a task force and providing that support for the students. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Paulina, again, for a great presentation today. And thank you, Diana Gutierrez, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Zane Charify, and they interned with the California Community College's Chancellor's Office.
Oops. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. And poster looks great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zane Charify. I interned for Foundation for California Community College, partnered with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So does the Student Equity and Achievement Program do enough to close the achievement gap among ethnic and racial lines? Underrepresented non-white community college students statistically have a lesser chance of graduating than privileged white students. Thankfully, the California Community College Chancellor's Office enacted the Student Equity and Achievement Program, also known as SEA, designed to regulate community college districts' funds to create their own programs to address this issue. My hypothesis is that this program's current implementation is correlated with increasing underrepresented community college students' graduation rates and is thus effective. I analyzed all 73 California community college districts within the 2019-2020 year cycle for the allocated SEA funding per each student for each district. We compared the graduation rate of minority students to the dollar amount to analyze the trend and direct impact of SEA funding. The evidence suggests that with the dollar amount community college districts spend per the target demographic of students found on the California Community College Chancellor's Office website, we find a weak negative correlation. These findings do not support my hypothesis. However, due to the pandemic during the period of observation, these numbers may be severely skewed, and thus more research in the post-pandemic environment is needed. My policy suggestions would be to incentivize districts to further close this equity gap monetarily for achieving equity goals. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Zane, for that great presentation. And then there's a question, great. So Amparo Diaz.
Great, thank you, Zane. Great presentation. I just, because you are looking at the SEA program, which offers student support services to achieve equity, what are the types of services that you found that are offered and how can they be delivered more equitably?
Great, thank you. I think the most equitable services provided to students would be basic needs. So general things like housing assistance, food pantries, and things of that nature. I think that would provide students the greatest need for, it would provide them their needs to get them more academic engagement, because through the hierarchy of needs, if you don't have food, water, or shelter, it's difficult to focus on your classes. So I think that would be the baseline student support services that need to be focused.
Great, thank you so much, Zane, for the great presentation. And thank you so much, Amparo Diaz, for that question. Appreciate it. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Andrew Nichols, who interned with Young Invincibles.
Hello, my name is Andrew Nichols. Incarcerated education and prison programs are life-changing experiences for incarcerated people. Participation in these programs reduces recidivism by 29%, and every dollar invested in prison education programs saves $2 on incarceration costs. However, formerly incarcerated students face many barriers in reentering into society. My research question is, to what extent can reentry programs at the California community colleges help incarcerated students reach their academic goals? I hypothesize that there would be consistent levels of support staff, but gaps in specialized services. While most community colleges have some kind of reentry program or association, I evaluated 14 of the 22 colleges that specifically have higher education in prison programs, distinguishing them from other types of carceral facilities. My hypothesis was partially supported, finding gaps in specialized services, but surprisingly, despite these programs serving higher education in prison programs, only 64% had a solely dedicated program coordinator, and only 35% had dedicated faculty leadership. Higher education in prison programs have tremendous benefits, but their full potential cannot be truly realized until reentry services and opportunities match those formerly incarcerated that then reenter. I recommend that colleges utilize the $10 million ongoing funding in the 2021 Budget Act for the Rising Scholars Network, which is the official name for reentry programs in the community college system, to hire more solely dedicated program coordinators, provide professional development for faculty, and offer specialized job placement services. This will ensure that formerly incarcerated students have the tools they need to succeed. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew, for that great presentation. And then if there's a question from the internship host site. And then if not, over to our academic team. If you just raise your hand. All right, great. Professor Butters.
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks, Andrew, for this great presentation here. So I've got a question about these higher education and prison programs. So the ones that you selected are community colleges that officially have these HEPs going on. But I'm just curious, like what happens at like Southwestern College and Chaffey College, outside of just them officially having an HEP, because it doesn't meet any of your criteria. So what's going on in these places that don't meet any of your criteria but officially have these HEPs?
Yeah, thank you. And that speaks to the specific research design I pursued. Community colleges have lots of services available to all, that are generally available to all students. But I wanted to specifically evaluate those services that are specialized to formerly incarcerated students. So while Chaffey and Southwestern, they have great basic needs centers programs with excellent mental health resources and housing assistance. I evaluated programs or the services they specifically had for incarcerated students, made solely available to them. So while they did have a reentry program that had many of these other generous supports, I did not find that they had some of these more specific ones geared toward formerly incarcerated students. So that hopefully helps explain why they had such larger gaps.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Great, thank you again, Andrew, for that great presentation, and thank you, Professor Butters, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Brianna Agee, who interned with Political Solutions.
Hold on a second. Is my screen shared or?
No.
Okay. Trying to. Okay, can everyone see it now?
Yep, looks great. Thank you, Brianna.
Okay, hi, good morning. My name is Brianna Agee, and I'm a UC Davis senior presenting on if inclusion efforts impact the academic success of disabled students in secondary schools. In California, students with disabilities graduate at extremely low rates on average. According to the Department of Education, 65% of them experience seclusion. This not only impacts their access to acquiring social and educational skills crucial to their academic well-being, but it also stunts their growth. For my measurements, for the years 2019 to 2020, I paired 4 public school districts total in Northern and Southern California, linking them together by similar special education student concentration and the overall demographic. My independent variable is measured through the standard of least restrictive environment, and my dependent variable is measured through the overall graduation rates. My hypothesis is the districts that meet the target will have higher graduation percentage and vice versa. I found that these districts there have between 10% to 18% disparity between the social education rates and the overall graduation rates. For my measurements, it seems that there's also a slightly lower rates in both districts and within those areas that don't meet the least restrictive target. There's a discrepancy also in the information provided at the district level for this group because charter schools, elementary schools, and high academic schools districts report more often than public school districts. On the school and district level, the state should require more readily available information on whether these standards are met for accountability and analysis purposes. Funding inclusion efforts in high concentrated areas are just as impactful as the socioeconomic background of the students. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for a great presentation today. And if there is a question from the internship host site. All right, and then over to our academic team, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. All right, Professor Quila.
Hi, Brianna. Thank you for your presentation today. I was just wondering if you go a little more into kind of how you chose the schools that you did and why you chose the schools that you did.
So when I chose my schools, I looked at the Department of Education and I looked at their local area. I looked at the local areas that they showed within the databases. And in the databases, they actually went off of the requirements of SELPA. And with the requirements of SELPA, they actually showed different requirements, but I focused mainly on the least restrictive environment. And when I compared the districts, I actually went about looking at not just it being in North and Southern California, but I also tried to compare the concentration of special ed students. And I also tried to compare them in regards to them being low income, because I wanted to look more on districts that were within $40,000 to like $60,000, which is considerably low income. And I also looked at the demographics, which had higher Hispanics, and I stuck with those types of districts so they could align and so they could actually be somewhat parallel and similar, so I could actually look at not just the similarities, but the differences in how, like for instance, Paris Union High and Patterson Joint Unified, they have lower graduation rates for special ed students, even though Paris Union High has 11,000 students in the household income at 53,000. So.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Brianna, for a great presentation, and thank you, Professor Quila, for that question. And so I just wanted to go ahead and just make a short remark before we go ahead and end our recording. So congratulations to all of our students on an amazing job. And thank you so much to all of our internship host sites who are here with us today and host our students this term. We would not be able to have this internship program without you. And so thank you, everyone. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Brooke stop the recording.